Hi, and welcome to the Spooky Hours. My name's David Saunderson, and today we're talking to Dr. Kaja Franck, PhD in English Literature, who has spent much of her time studying werewolves and vampires. How are you, Kaja?
I'm very well, thank you. How are you?
I'm very good too. We're continuing our series on Dracula and the characters and their influences. Today we're going to talk about Dr. Van Helsing. Kaja, you don't like Van Helsing, do you?
No, I don't. This is terrible. He's been, if you look at the adaptations that they've had of Van Helsing, they've made him into the real hero of the piece. And you'd think, because I'm also a doctor, that I would be very much seduced by his academic background. But actually, he really annoys me. And I think it's partly because, as someone who's an academic myself, I have a very clear idea of where my knowledge ends. So, and I know we've talked about this, you'll ask me to do something and I'll go, well, actually, that's not my area. And you'll go, well, it pretty much is. And I'm like, no, I'm very good at this tiny little thing.
Yep.
Whereas Van Helsing, partly because he is someone who's from the Victorian period, he has a PhD and he's like, well, I can talk about anything. I'm clearly partially a medical doctor, partially a sociologist, partially an anthropologist. And I find that quite annoying. But I find him arrogant, I'll be honest with you, a really arrogant character.
Okay. Now we're just pointing out that you're talking about the novel because there's many different versions of him.
Yes.
You're talking about the literary character that was written with the pen of Bram Stoker, not the Hugh Jackman version or the Peter Cushing or Edward von Sloan, any of those. You're saying he is arrogant in the novel.
Absolutely. I mean, I'm a big fan of the Hugh Jackman version, mainly because he looks very nice in it, and he's a bit more of an action hero, and I quite enjoy that. I think with the novel, it really came about when I was writing my PhD. So, when I was writing my PhD, and I was writing about, in particular, the way that Dracula could be read as a werewolf, but also the way that Van Helsing treats him. I was talking about how much Van Helsing just treats him like a type, a species, and in doing so creates the reason why you have to kill him at the end. And I'm a late 20th, 21st century person, so I'm not always assured that you have to kill the zombie at the end, not the zombie, the monster at the end, especially since in this case this is a monster who can talk and reason and has history and background. So I'm interested in learning more. Whereas Van Helsing spends the entirety of the novel just ensuring that Dracula has to die. And I also particularly hate him for the scene of the staking with Lucy Westenra. And some people have read that as symbolic of a gang rape, essentially. Yeah. And I did find, I mean, even now I read that scene and it is stomach churning in its violence. And again, in the assumption, like, why can't you just leave Lucy? Just let her be a vampire. She's clearly having more fun being a vampire than she did being a human woman in the late Victorian period. She can do all sorts of fun things. And then there's Van Helsing, the ultimate party pooper, coming in with his massive phallic symbol and wanting to hammer it into her chest. And then make her fiancé kiss her dead face afterwards. Like, yeah, it's all a bit suspect to me.
I mean, surely though she's going around, or threatening to kill people. Though, I mean, it's nice to say go off and have some fun, but she is a vampire.
She is a vampire. But again, most of the programs I watch, the vampires continue to be evil and terrible for a really, really, really long time. So there's the side where absolutely she is a monster, and of course you want to kill the evil. That's how these narratives go. It's good when the evil is dead at the end of it. But it's something about the complete lack of remorse. Van Helsing never sort of questions, well, to be honest, maybe I really don't like it because they're just challenging the food chain. And maybe it's just because I don't like being at the top of the food chain. There's been lots of discussion about this, but we animals, and we don't feel like we're completely evil. For a vampire, if you have to live off human blood to survive, you have to live off human blood to survive, really. And what else can you do in terms of your options there?
Do you think if the cow could kill us, it would kill us, though, to protect itself?
I don't know. I mean, to be fair, I think if this is completely off piste, the very, very, very early versions of cattle that we knew before we domesticated them, I think it was quite dangerous trying to kill them and milk them, because they were huge, and it was just that we've managed to domesticate smaller versions. And you see this in some adaptations of vampire stuff where they sort of domesticate the human, and the human is willing to donate a bit of blood. But for Lucy, she's just come back from the dead. Her only instinct is to drink blood. That's all she knows, and she knows that's what she needs to do to survive. Um, and I just think, Van Helsing, he just annoys me so much.
I feel this is kind of like a weird Good Morning Britain where I'm feeling like like this is the worst. This is far worse than Dracula. Being a Piers Morgan saying, "Are you seriously saying that we should have let Lucy go off and eat the beautiful lady, eat the child, and do all the other stuff because that was her role?"
Well, I think the other thing to think about is, of course, I'd go back to, this isn't like me saying, oh, that mass murderer should totally be free to walk the road, because we're not talking about reality, we're talking about the book, and the book is where you can explore fun, excitement, and the idea that Lucy Westenra, who has been this cosseted, beautiful young woman who people keep asking her to marry them, and you just get the sense that she's kind of bored and playing a game. I quite like the idea that she's this kind of perverted inversion of what she should be, and she becomes this anti-mother figure who goes around killing children rather than protecting children, a little bit like the Brides of Dracula as well. And there's something wonderfully freeing about that, reading that as a woman. And of course, in my case, as a heavily pregnant woman, there's something quite amusing about sidestepping or destroying those traditional roles and breaking down the idea of the traditional female, especially Victorian female. And I think Van Helsing, for me, he's a really conservative force. And what he just wants to do is make everything go back to normal, where I'm thinking maybe normal wasn't that great in the first place.
So I'll put it to you then. What did you think of Van Helsing in the most recent BBC version, when she is not a man?
I far appreciated Van Helsing more once you get into the BBC version. I partly because she was so well portrayed. That was a stellar performance. You could have just sat and watched her, and you would have been perfectly happy there, I think. And in some ways, you got to see a little bit more of the process of thinking, which I appreciated as well.
Okay, so she put more thought into it, whereas you think the other bloke is just basically it's a threat, so we need to kill it.
Yeah, essentially, and just isn't as interesting, if I'll be honest with you.
Have you ever seen a male version of Van Helsing other than Hugh Jackman that you've actually enjoyed? Like, what did you think of Peter Cushing?
Yeah, I mean, I'm trying to think. The problem is overall, because those characters, see, the most recent version where she was a female version, it was such a reinvention, a bit like the Hugh Jackman. So I think fundamentally one of my issues is with the character itself. So if you're not going to do something really insane to reinvent them, like go, I'm just going to swap gender and make them into a kind of nun-like creature and give them a weird thing, or you're going to make them into some kind of cool action hero, I'm still going to find some of the same issues. But I will say that I think the Peter Cushing version is in some ways is more sympathetic in some ways, I think, because you get to see Dracula as a more complete character themselves. Whereas in the novel, every time Van Helsing appears, or really when Van Helsing appears, you stop getting Dracula as a character. You just hear about what Dracula's doing, or you see what Dracula's doing, but you don't actually get Dracula being able to have a conversation. And I think the most successful adaptations make it so that a good Van Helsing and a good Dracula have to have a bit of a showdown and a conversation. And I don't think you really get that as much in the novel. You don't. So
you say basically Dracula's not there, so it's getting a bit boring.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think in the novel, Van Helsing's function is essentially to explain why we don't need to hear from Dracula and why Dracula doesn't need to be a character. When actually, if you think about them, they're both potentially very interesting erudite characters, and a showdown of the mind as much as of, we're going to kill this creature, makes it a more interesting storyline in total.
Okay. All right. Well, we've come up with lots of things. We started with, like, you don't like Van Helsing, and we've gone all over the place talking about cows killing us, and apologies for Lucy killing children. So we've gone quite far there in Van Helsing. So a very interesting conversation we've had today. We'll have to work out who we're going to talk about next. I think we might have to look at Lucy, because you've obviously got some very, very strong views of her. So when we come back for the next episode in this series of Kaya talking about Dracula characters, we'll look at the Bloofer lady and talk about her. So thanks very much. You take care, and we'll talk to you later.
Too. Thank you.
Bye bye.